Coming up on One Detroit, we've assembled a special roundtable to analyze the Democratic presidential debates in Detroit. What were the moments that stood out for voters? Who's going to move on to the next round of debates? And how did frontrunner Joe Biden handle his rivals? We'll hash it all out next. I'm Stephen Henderson. One Detroit is coming up.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV. The Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and by
Business Leaders for Michigan has 5 priorities to make Michigan a top 10 state. Achieve a balanced budget, cut long-term debt, fix our roads, improve all levels of education, further economic growth, plan for a stronger Michigan. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
Also brought to you by Ally, Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, and welcome to One Detroit. I'm Stephen Henderson in the Detroit Public Television studios. Christy McDonald is off this week. It was a week that saw Detroit and Michigan thrust into the national political spotlight. CNN hosted 2 Democratic debates over 2 nights at the Fox Theater. It's a crowded field of presidential hopefuls, and this was their chance to talk about the issues that matter most to voters right here. Coming up, we're going to debate the winners and losers, the highlights and the lowlights, and what happens next for the Democratic candidates. Here's a quick look at some of the moments that had people talking.
Detroit was mentioned, and I'm delighted Detroit is rebounding. But let us understand, Detroit was nearly destroyed because of awful trade policy, which allowed corporations to throw workers in this community out on the street as they move to low-wage countries.
So look, let's be clear about this. We are the Democrats. We are not about trying to take away health care from anyone. That's what the Republicans are trying to do. And we should stop using Republican talking points in order to talk with each other about how to best provide that health care.
And let's be very clear about this. When Vice President Biden was in the United States Senate working with segregationists to oppose busing, which was the vehicle by which we would integrate America's public schools, had I been in the United States Senate at that time, I would have been completely on the other side of the aisle. And let's be clear about this. Had those segregationists their way, I would not be a member of the United States Senate, Cory Booker would not be a member of the United States Senate, and Barack Obama would not have been in a position to nominate him to the title he now holds.
Obamacare took care of 20 million people right off the bat, 100 million people with pre-existing conditions. And in fact, what we got is a public option that in fact would allow anybody to buy in. No one has to keep their private insurance. They can buy into this plan, and they can buy into it with a $1,000 deductible and never have to pay more than 8.5% of their income when they do it. And if they don't have any money, they get in free. So this idea is a bunch of malarkey.
Bunch of malarkey. How many times have we heard that word out of Joe Biden's mouth? Let's bring in One Detroit contributor Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, and we have 2 special guests. Kim Trent, who is Senior VP at the public affairs firm Compass Strategies, and political strategist Howard Edelson, founder of the Edelson Group. Thanks all of you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Nolan, I'm going to start with you because I know you were watching to make your choice about which Democrat you're going to vote for next
I was
March.
having a big time. A big time watching this.
Who sealed the deal for you?
You know, I thought, and Howard and I spoke earlier in the week about what Joe Biden needed to do.
Yeah.
I thought last night Joe Biden did exactly what he needed to do. He stood there He took the attacks. He didn't get rattled. He answered every issue that was raised in his fashion, but he didn't get knocked down.
Yeah.
And I think if you're the front runner coming in and you don't get knocked down, you win. I didn't see anybody who really moved sharply up.
Yeah.
In my opinion, or probably in public opinion, over the last 2 nights.
You know, it was interesting because they had to have 2 nights because they have so many candidates. Some candidates got a chance to take after Joe Biden directly. The first night you had Warren and Sanders on the stage, and they couldn't do that as directly.
But that was really, I mean, it worked out really well. I know it was a random draw, supposedly, but you needed Sanders and Warren together because this isn't just everybody against Joe Biden. You're going to have to winnow out that progressive field. You can't have both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in this race if you're going to beat Joe Biden. One of them is going to have to prevail because together they have enough. There's enough progressive support to give Joe Biden a real challenge. As long as they're dividing that vote, he's safe.
Yeah, Kim.
I thought Joe Biden definitely did not get knocked down, and I do think he did a credible job. I do think, one thing that I think is sort of odd about him, he seems to get a little rattled when you talk about specific things from his past, particularly things that he said back in the 70s when, everyone has evolved. And it's kind of odd that he seems to be reluctant to just say, I've evolved in my thinking since then. Like the question about women working and how he thought that they would tear at the fabric. I mean, we know that he doesn't still think that. Right. Why not just say that instead of saying, well, that was a long time ago. Well, we know it was a long time ago. Has your opinion changed?
Yeah.
And it was just an odd thing to not be able to just own up to.
And he seemed to try to say, well, I didn't really mean that even then, which didn't make a lot of sense because, I mean, what he said was pretty clear. Right. It doesn't square, I think, with people
watching. And I think just given the president we have now, who is also very reluctant
lies
to
all the time.
Ever think that he should change his mind about anything, it would have been a nice contrast to say, well, I thought that then, and my thinking has evolved. My wife, he did say that his wife worked, both of his wives worked.
Howard, I thought that was a very effective response. Both of his wives had worked, his mother had worked. I mean, I thought he handled that very smoothly
that's what happened with his family, but are you going to give support to
other
families?
When you're talking about a person who, whether he supports working women or not, his wife worked all through the White House, and he noted that.
And as you pointed out, he had one job to do. He had to show that he had energy and that he could throw a punch and take a punch, and he did that. And I think what gets him off balance a little bit is, he's got a long record. He's proud of it. And at the time, he was a leader. And so you can cherry pick anything 20, 30 years ago and take it out of context. And that's what people are doing. And I think Barack Obama summed it up very well. Democrats have to be careful not going in a circular firing squad. And a little bit of last night and the night before was just about that.
Well, luckily he won't have a general election opponent if he is the nominee who will be able to kind of undercut him on race issues. So, it's not like Donald Trump's going to say, hey, I don't like your record on race.
That first night, on Tuesday night, the first night of the debate, when Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders were going at it, or were on stage together, and almost working tag team. They didn't really get much friction between them. That dynamic has to change when they get on the same stage with Joe Biden, doesn't it?
Well, I think you're right. They were like attached at the hip because their policies are attached at the hip, and they represent that progressive side of the party. So when they get up on the stage with Joe Biden and the other moderates, there'll be a big contrast that is going to be revealed. But I still think Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they're attached at the hip on those type of issues. I don't think we're going to see them attacking each other.
But they can't stay that way.
Well, I mean, I think one question is whether Elizabeth Warren kind of inherits the space that Bernie Sanders created 4 years ago, right? He's the guy who ran 4 years ago, came pretty close, didn't get it done. Is she a more appealing messenger for essentially the same platform this time? And, she's got this wonderful way.
Have the baggage that Bernie Sanders has.
That's true.
Because there are a lot of people who are still smarting from 2016 who don't think that he really was all in with Hillary Clinton and that his supporters kind of contributed to her not winning the election. So I do think in some ways she's more appealing.
She's definitely fresher.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, Nolan, to your point, when are they going to attack each other? I think the real question is when these other progressive candidates with a 1%, 2% drop out, where do those voters
Where
go?
do they end up going?
If they
right?
start adding up and falling behind Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders is falling behind, he's going to attack her.
But she has an advantage in that he wears openly the socialist label. She calls it progressive. She never says, I'm a socialist. These are socialist policies.
She might have said she believes in markets and capitalism.
Right. And I think that gives her an edge, not just over him, not just in the primary, because a lot of people saying all they hear is socialist, and still not a very attractive word in America. And I think she gains the advantage of being able to say, well, I'm a democratic progressive, and it's not. She's a little more approachable in that regard than Bernie Sanders is.
So let's talk about some of the subjects they were debating. Healthcare, of course, is a big deal. We saw in the clip Elizabeth Warren with, I thought, a really good line about we're Democrats. We're not trying to take healthcare from anybody, but there are a lot of questions about how to expand people who are covered and how they're,
Put yourself,
how to pay for it.
Put yourself in the place of the American voter who have been listening to Democrats now for a decade say about of the Affordable Care Act works. The Affordable Care Act was the answer. And now suddenly we're in this campaign and the Affordable Care Act, the healthcare system's broken, it's busted. We need a new fix. We need Medicare for all.
Right.
And Joe Biden's up there saying, and to his credit, and some of the moderates on Tuesday night, wait a minute, we just need to reform and fix what's wrong with Obamacare. We can't try to convince the electorate, okay, now that what we did to you before is not working, so we're going to throw it all out and the government's going to take over. That's what people worried about when they were debating Obamacare.
And I think you're right. I think there was too much attention paid to the plans.
Yes.
You know, no one wants to hear in a debate what is on page 108, section 3, right? They want to hear that, okay, what is going to happen with pre-existing conditions? Republicans are trying to take that away. They're in court right now. You didn't really hear much about that. So I think Democrats really miss an opportunity to talk about those type of things that get you in the heart, pre-existing conditions.
But I think that's also a failure of the moderators because first of all, I thought the debate was way too long.
Questions were
It
terrible.
was way too
It
long.
wasn't a debate.
And then it wasn't a debate. That's
It was
true.
a show.
Right. And so too long, and then too much just in the weeds focus on healthcare, which is a huge issue. Don't get me wrong. I mean, but climate change, Jay Inslee, bless his heart, kept trying to get in there to talk about climate change.
Howard Beale.
On the
It's too late! I thought that was the funniest moment when he's up in Biden's face. It's too late, the house is on fire! You thought, wow.
It kind of is, though.
How did this crazy man get up there?
He lives in California part of the year. He knows it actually is on fire. So.
But Kim is right. Those moderators put on a show. It wasn't a debate.
Questions were
they didn't
awful.
follow their own rules. They let people go overtime. They let people ask questions of candidates. That's not a debate. That's a show. They called it a showdown, and that's what they were trying to produce. And it's unfortunate. I know YouTube would never allow that to happen.
We
certainly
never.
But they let Bill de Blasio become one of the moderators.
Yeah, right.
He asked more questions than Don Lemon did. And you kept waiting for the moderators to say, wait a minute, we asked that question of you. You don't get to, because every question he said, well, wait a minute, I got a question for Joe Biden. And Joe Biden sat there and answered him when he should have said, what the heck's going on here?
Right.
So one of the other things I thought was really interesting and has been interesting about this race so far is the presence of race in the dialogue. I can't remember another presidential primary where phrases like white privilege, where reparations, these pretty contentious issues among some of the population are taking center stage in the Democratic debate. You saw Kirsten Gillibrand yesterday really take on this idea of it's white responsibility to talk to white people about white privilege and race. I sat there, my eyes just kind of popped out of my head. The question, though, is does that appeal enough to I guess, mainstream voters who still have a little bit of difficulty being comfortable with the race.
They might work in the Democratic primary. All that stuff goes away. You get to the general election.
You don't feel that you'll be able to talk about that?
They're not going to talk about reparations in the general election. They're not going to talk about the race in the way it was talked about last night. This conversation was aimed at Democratic primary voters, and African Americans play a huge role in deciding who the Democratic nominee is going to be.
Well, I was in a room full of African American women yesterday, and the consensus that they came up with was they thought that having the debate here was almost a wasted opportunity because they thought there wasn't enough talk about just racial disparities and how policy plays into it. Because I think a lot of how race is framed when people talk about it in America is about individual choices. This person doesn't like this person, or this group doesn't like this group, rather than the role that policy has played in creating racial disparities. Right. And I thought Bennett at one point actually did a really credible job of explaining that, talking about education and how policy choices led to, kind of disparities in education. Yeah. And I think that, if you're going to come to Detroit, a city that, and again, obviously it's a national debate, but I do think that was kind of a wasted opportunity when you ended up spending 45 minutes talking about health.
But Howard, location seemed not to matter at all. The fact that they were in Detroit seemed to have no influence on the conversation.
It nice.
You did that.
We did look good.
It looked beautiful. But in terms of talking about poverty, talking about an urban agenda,
that's right.
Talking about the challenges of cities after Trump made Baltimore an issue, the challenges of cities like Detroit and Baltimore and what Washington's role is in solving those problems. Didn't get into any of that over 2 nights.
Another missed opportunity, as Kim was saying. I mean, urban agenda. You're sitting here in a city, Detroit, that is on the rebound, and you really didn't talk about what their urban agenda was, whether it was infrastructure, education, healthcare. What a missed opportunity, and as you pointed out, the president picks on another urban area, Baltimore, and none of the Democrats bring that up. And that is a national issue. The urban agenda for all these cities around the country is a national priority.
Yeah. You did see Jay Inslee, who's the governor of Washington, start to talk about polluted areas of the country, and he used 48217 here in Southeast Michigan. I thought that was a pretty sophisticated way to show, hey, I know where I am, and I know what's going on in this community, but no one else seemed prepped for anything like that.
I thought Jay Inslee really stood out last night. I know you kind of go after him on his climate change, but
he's one note.
It's every.
But his point is that's the only note worth playing.
One issue candidate is not going to win.
But I think what he's trying to do is say
what he does is take his issue that he's passionate about, obviously you might say fanatical, and elevate it on the stage. I'd say it twice. But a one-issue candidate that was the last you're going to see of Jay Inslee. He will not make the debate stage.
But I hope it's not the last we hear of that issue.
It won't be.
We would like to
certainly it won't
20 years.
Well, you can debate what year is the last year that we have. Yeah, 10 years. You can debate that. But you can't debate it's happening. And you can't debate it impacts our health, our jobs, our economy, everything.
Yeah. And I thought Joe Biden handled that question very well. He said, here's my plan, without wearing us out with it. I mean, it seemed a reasonable, responsible approach, rather than, oh man, we're going to shut down everything tomorrow because we'll die if we don't.
Candidates like Inslee and Yang are there. They're the one note candidates or one issue candidates, however you want to frame it, who know that they're not going to be president of the United States, likely, but they're putting something on the table that both of those issues are important issues, and why not make sure? I think that's why they're there. I don't think either of them really actually think they're going to be president.
Yang had any, the $1,000 a month for everyone. Ridiculous, I think. But
I'm for that.
What's
your problem?
I wanted to start now before it gets.
My 11-year-old is wondering what the cutoff is. What is an adult?
All right. Well, but his point about the worker displacement with artificial intelligence, that's real.
Yeah, it is.
We saw what happened with trade agreements and the displacement of workers. With Amazon, the displacement of workers. Artificial intelligence is going to displace workers. No one's talking about it. What are we going to do?
The thing is, I mean, even this whole issue, this goes into everything that actually created a Donald Trump, because he preyed upon this idea that immigration is the reason that you don't have a job. But automation has probably twice as much to do
Exactly.
with it as immigration.
Sure.
And no one is talking
Has
about
figured out anything
how
about it.
work is going to be fundamentally disrupted, and no one has a plan for it. That's why I actually like Andrew.
I don't think
Congressman
this is a
Ryan did say he wanted a chief manufacturing officer. I thought that was a unique idea that any
we've
president
had, I
should.
mean, Obama had a manufacturing czar at one time. But
Yes.
this, I still
Help
contend,
save the autos.
this is not an issues election. This is what the American people aren't looking for your plans and aren't looking to details of all the proposal. This is a personality
It is
election,
personality, yeah.
and who could rise to be a different kind of president than the one they have without totally remaking the country.
Right.
Because I don't think that there's a mood to totally remake the
Right.
country. They're looking for a leader who stood up over these last 2 nights and looked like a leader.
Yeah. All right, so we've got a couple minutes left. Who is that person? Is it still Joe Biden? Is there somebody else who's challenging?
I think it's Joe Biden. I think he's the guy who, you could, the voters will say, I can put my trust in him. He's not going to go off the dock, but he's not going to be Donald Trump. And I think a lot of voters are fairly satisfied and content with where the country is. They're just nervous about Donald Trump, and I didn't see anybody who could challenge Joe Biden for that role.
Kim, did you feel like he has anything to be worried about?
Biden?
Joe Biden?
Biden did what he was supposed to do when
Yeah.
he came here. I mean, he's not my first choice.
Yeah.
But I certainly, I would vote for him 10 times over Donald Trump.
Right.
So,
A lot of
and I
people
think
would.
that most Democratic voters, I think a lot of independents,
Yeah.
I think most people, I think he's someone who people would feel comfortable with, which is, I think, a part of what he
Yeah.
had to accomplish on the debate stage.
I'm really
Yesterday, he did
interested
that.
in the support he maintains from black voters who have 2 black candidates in this race to choose from, and they're not all that wild by
that
them.
Cory Booker hasn't caught on.
Caught on a little more, right?
People, I mean, I thought last night
did
he
okay
was
last night.
great. I
He did
thought
better last night
Yeah,
than he
he
did
was
2
better.
weeks
Yeah,
ago.
he was much better than he was in the first debate.
Yeah.
And I think that he is definitely trying to be seen as a more of a moderating voice in the. I mean, he's not.
Yeah.
He has some progressive ideas, but he's not a
We got a minute.
fanatic.
I want to
as no
make
one
sure we
would
get
say.
Howard's take on this.
Well, I think you're right. Biden did what he had to do. I think the format kept people from talking about a vision, a future, because everyone wanted to play gotcha politics and really did a disservice.
But who else gets roses going into the next debate when you're only going to have 7, maybe 8 people on the stage? Who else will be there?
I think from last night, you have Biden, Harris. From the night before, you have Sanders, you have Warren, Buttigieg. I think those are the top 5 that come to my mind
Does
that
Booker
are
get there?
absolute. And
I would put
Booker.
Booker on
Yeah,
my
I would
list.
too.
Yeah.
And so that's the field you think going forward?
The top 5.
And that'll be
I
a
going
wouldn't
really
forward.
mind saying
different
goodbye to
debate.
Sanders personally, to be honest with you, because I agree with Nolan. You have these 2 people who are basically the same person.
Yeah, right.
Let's get rid of one of them.
We got to
Yeah.
narrow the field.
Right.
All right, we could talk about this all day, but we don't have that much airtime. Thanks very much to all of you for
Thank you,
being
guys.
here. All right, that's going to do it for One Detroit. Thanks for joining us. Go to DetroitPBS.org to check out more stories and past shows. And you can always connect with us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. Christy McDonald will be back next week. We'll see you then.